Have you ever wondered why some people seem to move through life with a quiet kind of clarity, as if they learned something early on that you somehow missed? Sometimes it feels like there were lessons meant to guide us, but nobody ever explained them. Not clearly, not gently, not at the moment we needed them most. Welcome to Silent Depths, a place where we slow down and explore those overlooked truths, the ones that can reshape how we see ourselves and the world around us. If this kind of journey feels meaningful to you, feel free to subscribe. It helps you stay close to the stories that unfold softly, one layer at a time. Chapter 1. What no one explained early enough. There are moments in adulthood when you catch yourself pausing in the middle of an ordinary day, realizing that the world feels heavier than you expected it to be. Not because something dramatic has happened, but because you start to sense the gaps in your early understanding, gaps you didn't even know existed. You look back at the years behind you and notice how many situations would have unfolded differently if someone had simply taken the time to explain how people truly operate, how decisions are made beneath the surface, how motives shape behavior long before words are spoken. You realize that the guidance you received growing up, while well-intended, was often built from simplicity rather than depth, from ideals rather than the mechanics that actually govern life. Most fathers teach what they know: effort, discipline, endurance, the outer shell of becoming capable. But very few unfold the inner architecture of human nature, the quiet, strategic awareness that Machievelli understood so deeply. He saw that people move according to pressure, fear, insecurity, and advantage, a set of forces almost everyone feels, yet rarely acknowledges openly. Without someone guiding you into this understanding early, you enter the world with a certain softness, believing interactions are as straightforward as they appear. Only later do you discover how much stays hidden behind tone, posture, hesitation, and silence. As you move through the world, you begin noticing that intentions are layered. The way a colleague compliments your idea while already planning a route around you. The way a friend seeks your advice not to understand your perspective, but to confirm a decision they already made. The way someone frames a conversation to steer you toward a conclusion that benefits them. These details reveal themselves slowly, almost reluctantly, as if life waits for you to grow quiet enough to see what was always there. And once you begin to notice, you can't unsee it. The world rearranges itself around this new clarity. You realize that people are not always consistent with their words, not because they are malicious, but because they are human. They are guided by insecurities they do not admit, desires they do not confess, and fears they rarely show. You witness how actions shift depending on who holds influence, who provides opportunity, or who threatens stability. Nothing about this is inherently negative. It is simply the structure of human behavior. But if no one explained it to you while you were growing up, you enter adulthood unprepared for the subtle currents that decide outcomes long before you take part in them. There were moments earlier in life when a warning would have changed everything. When you trusted someone too quickly, not because they earned it, but because you believed sincerity was the default state of people. You discovered too late that sincerity often appears only when it aligns with someone's needs. There were choices you made assuming fairness, assuming that effort alone would determine your direction, and those assumptions quietly collapsed when you encountered people who played by an entirely different set of rules. And as painful as those experiences were, they became the doorway to a deeper understanding. You start paying attention with more patience. You listen not just to what people say, but to what they avoid saying. You read the spaces between their sentences, the tension behind their politeness, the slight shift in their expression when a topic touches something unspoken. You begin noticing how often people disguise self-interest as goodwill, how often encouragement is given only when it costs nothing, how often disappointment is framed as concern. You don't become cynical, you simply become aware. And that awareness gives you room to breathe, room to navigate with steadiness instead of confusion. There is a quiet maturity that forms when you stop expecting the world to operate on the same principles you were taught as a child. You learn that kindness is meaningful, but it must coexist with discernment. You learn that honesty is valuable, but it doesn't require exposing your inner world to everyone you meet. You learn that confidence does not come from asserting yourself loudly, but from understanding the landscape you move through. Machievelli often wrote about the necessity of perceiving the true nature of situations, not the polished version people present. You begin to understand what he meant. The idea that clarity is not about knowing everything, but about recognizing what matters. As this awareness grows, you find yourself responding differently in conversations. You no longer rush to fill silence, because you understand silence reveals things words never could. You don't explain yourself unnecessarily, because you see that explanation is often wasted on those who have already decided what they want to believe. You stop taking offense at small provocations, realizing they are often projections of someone's internal unrest rather than reflections of your own shortcomings. You become more selective with your energy, more intentional with your commitments, more grounded in your decisions. Slowly, your internal world becomes calmer. The confusion that once flourished in the gaps between your expectations and reality begins to dissolve. You start trusting your observations more than assumptions. You give yourself permission to withdraw from situations that feel misaligned without needing justification. You learn to navigate uncertainty without panic, because you understand that unpredictability is not a threat. It is simply part of the terrain. And with time, you notice something subtle. The world responds differently to you. People sense composure in your presence. They recognize that you are not easily swayed, not because you are stubborn, but because you have developed a depth of perception that prevents manipulation. You no longer move reactively. You move deliberately. The pace of your thoughts slows, not from lack of urgency, but from clarity. You're no longer trying to catch up to an understanding you never received. You are building your own understanding piece by piece, shaped by experience, reflection, and a newfound attentiveness to the complexity of human behavior. Nothing about this transformation is loud. It begins quietly, unfolds quietly, and settles quietly into your way of moving through the world. And though no one explained these things to you early, you now understand them in a way that feels earned. The kind of understanding that cannot be handed down. It must be discovered. Chapter 2. The weight of what is shown. There is an economy to appearances, a currency more valuable than most realize, and men learn its rules slowly, often by paying too high a price. From youth, you are taught that truth matters, that honesty roots relationships and clears the path ahead. Yet life introduces you to a quieter reality. People trade in impressions because impressions are what others remember, and memory is the scaffold on which influence is built. The face you present, the temper you cultivate, the stories you prefer to tell about yourself, these are not trivial choices. They are instruments that shape the way doors open and close. Machiavelli recognized this when he advised that rulers must appear virtuous even when they are not, because the public demands a particular image and will be moved by it long after the finer truths have faded. Learning how to inhabit a presence that commands without coercion becomes one of the subtler arts of mature life. You notice it first in small places. The colleague who always arrives calm and prepared is granted trust more quickly than the one who loudly asserts competence. The neighbor who smiles politely but never overshares is consulted when trouble arises. The partner who conceals agitation behind composure is allowed to lead difficult conversations. There is a gravitational pull toward those who master the outward signals of steadiness. And as you watch, you become aware that appearance is not merely a mask, but a bridge. A well-worn face of reliability can carry you farther than raw talent alone, because people will give weight to a history that looks consistent and deliberate. This is not performance without substance, though the two can blur. The most effective presences are rooted in a quiet integrity, a steadiness that is felt even when not named. But the line between cultivated dignity and empty display is where many falter. Some adopt a posture only as a shield, hollow behind its careful smile, and others mistake transparency for strength and hand away leverage they have not yet earned. What you learn as you grow is that reputation is both fragile and durable. It can be wounded by a moment of thoughtlessness or fortified by 1,000 small acts of steadiness that no one notices at the time. The paradox is that people often reward the appearance of capability before they test it, which means the face you show can generate opportunities that then allow you to prove your substance. You come to understand the rhythm of restraint. There is an economy to speaking fewer words and letting actions accumulate meaning over time, to avoiding the temptation to clarify every misinterpretation as if explanation itself were the currency of persuasion. Those who rush to explain often reveal more than necessary. They disclose weak points to cover them, and in doing so invite scrutiny. The wiser course, you observe, is to let silence be a kind of grammar, to allow the world to complete the sentences you begin without needing to finish them yourself. In rooms where stakes are unspoken, silence can pressure others to reveal their intentions first, and that knowledge changes everything. Timing becomes a form of tact. You learn not only what to say, but when to speak it, not only whom to trust, but when to extend trust, not only when to press, but when to yield. There is a cadence to influence that mirrors music rather than mathematics, an ebb and flow where the loudest voice rarely holds power for long. People who understand cadence know how to pause in a conversation to let a suggestion settle, how to let an idea ripple through a group before deciding whether to support it, and how to withdraw gracefully when the terrain shifts. This is not manipulation as an end, but an economy of effect. The awareness that the right move at the wrong time is often worse than no move at all. You see this played out in simpler patterns too, like the way requests framed with respect return more readily than demands issued with impatience, or how the person who shows up with preparedness signals reliability in a way that excuses many other imperfections. The world leans toward those who give it a reason to lean, and you learn to construct those reasons with care rather than haste. In doing so, you find that your relationships deepen not because you have become more charming, but because you have become more deliberate. People prefer to stand with someone whose surface suggests steadiness, because standing beside the steady is less costly than standing beside the volatile. There is also a delicate art to concealment that has nothing to do with deception and everything to do with prudence. You begin to understand that disclosing every thought is not virtue, but vulnerability, and that selective openness is a tool of protection. When you withhold certain opinions until you have gathered more context, you avoid the frequent traps of premature commitments. When you present proposals with a few deliberate omissions, you leave space for others to contribute and thus invest in the plan themselves. In this framing, concealment is not an act of hiding so much as a choice to manage exposure. It recognizes that influence often grows when others believe they have shaped the outcome. As your sense of presence refines, you also become more attuned to the faces of others. You detect when someone is leaning into truth and when they are arranging it, when their confidence is anchored in deed and when it is built on borrowed phrases. This discernment sharpens your choices, whose counsel to accept, whose partnership to seek, which conflicts merit engagement, and which will simply consume you. You begin to prefer fewer but deeper commitments, because the returns measured in attention and trust are greater when invested wisely. The energy once spent chasing approval is now allocated to maintaining constancy, because a calm constancy draws people naturally. In this reorientation, there is a subtle shift in how you measure success. The loud victories that once seemed glorious lose some of their luster, and you find yourself valuing the quieter gains, the steady growth of influence, the accumulation of small, reliable acts, the ability to enter a room and anchor it without a display. The world still admires spectacle, but you have learned that spectacle fades while steadiness becomes part of the fabric of how others perceive you. The consequence is not that you become less ambitious, but that your ambition finds different instruments: patience, selective disclosure, and the craft of presence. Over time, these adjustments speak for themselves. Opportunities arrive not because you sought the spotlight, but because your composed presence made others comfortable casting their attention upon you. Invitations follow from people who prefer to align with someone who brings clarity rather than chaos. You notice that crises are less likely to sweep you away when you have practiced steadiness. You recover with less damage because your decisions are measured, not reflexive, and because you have cultivated relationships that extend trust in difficult times. None of this is taught with ceremony. It is absorbed in how you live and in the examples you observe. There is no abrupt transformation, only a slow accrual of habits that change the field of possibility around you. The face you choose to present becomes less a mask and more a lens through which the world reads you. And that lens, handled with care, makes more of life legible and navigable than raw skill alone could achieve. Chapter 3. The unspoken cost of misplaced trust. There comes a time when a man looks back at the choices he made in the name of trust and realizes how many of them were built on assumptions rather than understanding. Trust, especially when given early in life, carries a softness that feels natural because you grow up believing that sincerity is the default state of human interaction. You assume that people mean what they say, that intentions align with words, that loyalty is reciprocal. Only later do you begin to notice the subtle fractures beneath those beliefs, hairline cracks that reveal themselves slowly, often through experiences that leave a quiet sting rather than a dramatic wound. You recall moments when you extended your confidence to someone who had not yet shown they could be responsible with it, not because you were naive, but because you were taught that trusting people is a virtue in itself. Yet life has a way of teaching you that trust without discernment is less a virtue and more a vulnerability. Machievelli understood that alliances are rarely formed from pure goodwill. They emerge from intersecting interests, from circumstances that make cooperation useful. When those circumstances shift, loyalty often shifts with them. This does not make people cruel. It makes them human. But this nuance is rarely explained early in life, and so you learn it through experiences that force reflection. You begin to notice patterns. The friend who was always available when you were convenient, who drifted the moment you needed something that required actual effort. The coworker who praised your ideas in private, yet stayed silent when credit was assigned publicly. The partner who spoke about future plans, yet hesitated each time commitment required sacrifice. These patterns accumulate quietly, and you start to see that misplaced trust has a cost measured not only in disappointment, but in time, energy, and emotional investment. It is not betrayal that shapes you most deeply. It is the realization that you offered access to parts of yourself that should have been earned, not freely granted. You start to understand that trust is not something to be given as a gesture of goodwill. It is a resource to be allocated with intention. It must be tested, observed, and strengthened through consistency, not feelings alone. This shift is not the birth of cynicism. It is the maturation of awareness. You learn to separate warmth from reliability, charm from character, and familiarity from loyalty. As you adjust to this new understanding, your interactions change subtly. You listen more carefully to what people reveal unintentionally, their frustrations, their ambitions, their inconsistencies. You pay attention to how they speak of others when those others are not present, because that often tells you how they will speak of you. You notice how they handle disappointment, whether they turn inward to reflect or outward to blame. You observe whether someone's excitement remains steady across time or fades when novelty wears off. Trust becomes less about words and more about patterns, less about emotion and more about behavior stretched across different circumstances. This awareness also reshapes how you evaluate generosity. You learn that giving too freely often teaches others to take without considering the effort behind your actions. When you set no boundaries, people assume you have none, and they will use your willingness as if it costs you nothing. But you begin to see that generosity without limits depletes rather than connects. It creates relationships where you carry the weight and others enjoy the comfort. So you start placing gentle borders around your time and energy, not to push people away, but to maintain balance. You find that those who value you respect these borders, while those who only valued what you provided quietly drift away. There is also a shift in how you process disappointment. Instead of viewing it as a reflection of your own misjudgment, you begin to recognize it as part of the natural sorting mechanism of life. Not every connection is meant to endure, and not every person you meet is capable of offering the kind of commitment you instinctively give. Some people are simply limited, not malicious. They can offer only what their own capacity allows. Understanding this softens the frustration and helps you release expectations that once weighed heavily on you. The world becomes easier to navigate when you stop demanding depth from shallow waters. Gradually, your sense of trust evolves from something you extend automatically to something you grant deliberately. You discover that relationships grounded in mutual consistency feel lighter, more effortless, because neither person is carrying more than their share. You begin to recognize the quiet reliability in people who show up without needing recognition, who remember small details without being asked, who offer their perspectives without pushing their agendas. These are the people you begin to trust, not because they ask for it, but because their behavior over time deserves it. There is something liberating in this transformation. You no longer feel obligated to maintain connections that drain you, nor guilty for stepping back from those who continually take more than they give. You understand that distance is sometimes an act of self-preservation rather than rejection, a way of protecting the parts of yourself that once suffered from being too open, too accessible, too eager to believe the best in everyone. You develop a calm confidence in choosing who belongs in your life, not based on history or sentiment, but on alignment of values and consistency of action. As this mindset settles deeper into you, your relationships become clearer, calmer, and more meaningful. You surround yourself not with perfect people, but with people whose intentions match their behaviors, whose words carry the weight of follow-through, whose presence brings steadiness rather than confusion. And you find that trust, when granted wisely, becomes lighter to carry. It strengthens rather than burdens. It enriches rather than costs. With time, the world becomes less chaotic, not because people have changed, but because your understanding of them has. You no longer rush into connections out of loneliness, nor hold on to them out of fear. You trust slowly, observe patiently, release gracefully, and choose deliberately. And through this patience, you build a foundation within yourself that feels far steadier than the one you inherited early in life. There is nothing dramatic about this shift. It's a quiet realignment, a gradual strengthening, a slow unlearning of the idea that trust must be offered before it can be earned. You discover that trust, like resilience, like discipline, like presence, becomes powerful only when shaped with intention. And intention, once cultivated, changes everything. Chapter 4: The Hidden Language People Speak Without Words. There comes a moment in every man's life when he realizes the world isn't shaped by fairness, but by the quiet agreements others made while he wasn't looking. Some people enter adulthood believing the rules are written on the surface, obvious and universal. Others learn early that the rules live beneath the surface, spoken in subtle gestures, weighted pauses, and decisions made in private rooms you were never invited into. If your father didn't teach you this, you may have walked through life assuming that effort alone could push you forward. Yet effort without perception is like walking blindfolded. Your determination becomes noise instead of direction. This chapter is about that hidden layer, the layer where people reveal who they truly are, not through their declarations or promises, but through the small choices they think no one notices. Machievelli understood that the true structure of power is built from these details, and anyone who wants to navigate life without being toyed with must learn to read them. Not to manipulate others, but to stop being manipulated. Not to dominate, but to understand. Because understanding is the quiet form of power that can't be taken from you. When you observe people closely, not suspiciously, but attentively, you begin to see how little of human behavior is random. The colleague who always arrives early isn't simply disciplined. He wants proximity to those who make decisions before the day begins. The friend who compliments you too quickly isn't necessarily kind. He might be softening the ground before asking for something. The person who watches more than they speak isn't shy. They're collecting information before committing to anything. None of these patterns are inherently good or bad. They are simply signals. And the person who can read signals moves through the world with a clarity that others mistake for luck. Most people watch the world as if everything is literal. If someone says they are fine, they believe it. If someone says they support you, They assume it will stay true forever. If someone promises something, they take the promise as a contract rather than a possibility. Part of maturity is learning that words are the least reliable indicator of intent. Silence is more honest. Patterns are more honest. Repeated behavior is the most honest of all. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must be judged by results rather than declarations, and the same principle applies to everyone you meet. Look at what they do repeatedly, not what they say once. This shift in perception changes everything. When someone suddenly alters their tone, you don't feel confused. You recognize that something has shifted in their priorities. When someone withdraws, you don't panic. You understand they are protecting something or reconsidering their position. When someone compliments you excessively, you don't become flattered. You ask yourself what outcome they hope to shape. It's not about being cynical. Cynicism clouds your vision, but awareness sharpens it. Consider how different your relationships become once this awareness settles in. You start noticing who supports you when there is no benefit to them. You notice who disappears when your momentum slows. You notice who only appears when the spotlight is warm and the environment is comfortable. These observations don't require confrontation. They don't require dramatic realizations or emotional outbursts. They simply guide your decisions. You offer your trust more selectively. You give your time more intentionally. You invest energy where it grows rather than where it drains. There is a particular kind of strength that develops when you no longer rely on others' words to shape your expectations. You stop being disoriented by sudden changes in behavior because you've learned to anticipate them. You stop feeling betrayed by people acting in their own interest because you understand that everyone is guided by a mixture of fear, desire, insecurity, and opportunity. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you steady. You begin to recognize that the world is not divided into good people and bad people, but into people who are aware of their motives and people who are driven by them blindly. The unaware drift from impulse to impulse, reacting emotionally, making promises they can't keep, behaving inconsistently, and expecting others to interpret this chaos as sincerity. The aware move differently. Their actions have weight. Their choices are deliberate. Their intentions are not always announced, but they are always consistent. And when you start moving with that same steadiness, people respond to you differently. They sense that you are not easily swayed by flattery or shaken by pressure. They realize that your attention is sharp enough to notice what they try to hide. They understand that your patience is not passivity, but calculation. This subtle shift changes the dynamics of every environment you enter, not because you try to dominate, but because you can't be dominated quietly. Once you start noticing the hidden language people speak without words, something else becomes clear. You realize how often you used to overlook opportunities. You see how many times someone revealed their true intentions, and you ignored it because you wanted to believe their words instead. You see how many situations could have been avoided if you had paid attention to the tone instead of the sentence, the pause instead of the explanation, the pattern instead of the exception. This awareness isn't about regret. It's about foundation. It gives you a stronger base to stand on, a clearer lens to perceive from, and a steadier direction to move toward. And with that awareness, you begin to navigate life with a level of calm others mistake for confidence. Chapter 5. The moves people make when they think you're not watching. There is a certain advantage in not announcing your awareness. When people believe you are oblivious, They show their true nature with remarkable honesty. They reveal their intentions in subtle shifts, small decisions, and quiet habits. They speak a language they don't even realize they're speaking. If your father didn't teach you to read these signals, you may have moved through life assuming that transparency is a norm, that people mean what they say, and that loyalty is as straightforward as the stories told about it. But the world does not operate on declarations. It operates on patterns, motives, and incentives. Before you develop influence, before you sharpen strategy, before you learn to navigate power, you must learn to see. This chapter is about that sight. The sight that notices the way someone's eyes flicker when you mention a success. The way someone becomes strangely quiet when your opportunities grow. The way someone offers help only when it aligns with their benefit. The way someone's sudden warmth appears the moment you become useful. These are not dramatic moments. They are not confrontational or loud. They are quiet signals that only the attentive catch. Machiavelli wrote that men are quick to forget the death of their father, but never forget the loss of their inheritance. A harsh observation, but one rooted in a deep understanding of human nature. People protect their interests more fiercely than they protect their relationships. Understanding this is not about becoming distrustful. It is about becoming realistic. The person who sees clearly is not blindsided when others prioritize themselves. They expect it, plan around it, and respond with steadiness rather than shock. Look closely at the people around you. You will notice that everyone has a rhythm, a signature pattern of behavior that repeats itself in moments of pressure, temptation, jealousy, or opportunity. When someone feels threatened by your growth, they may cloak it in subtle sarcasm or dismissive remarks. When someone desires something you have, they may shift from competition to imitation without acknowledging it. When someone resents your boundaries, they may start testing them in small, seemingly insignificant ways. The person who pays attention sees these tests for what they are, previews of future behavior. There is power in staying silent when you notice these shifts. You don't confront. You don't accuse. You don't react emotionally. You observe. You gather information. You let people believe their behavior is invisible while you collect a clear understanding of their nature. This does not make you passive. It makes you strategic. Machiavelli advised rulers to appear open while staying inwardly calculated, not out of malice, but because transparency invites manipulation. Silence, on the other hand, reveals truth. Consider how different your relationships become when you adopt this quiet form of awareness. You begin to see who acts out of genuine loyalty and who acts out of convenience. You notice who remains consistent when you have nothing to offer, and who drifts away the moment your value decreases. You notice who speaks highly of you in rooms you're not in, and who speaks differently when the audience changes. People reveal themselves most clearly when they believe the stakes are low, and those observations give you the blueprint to decide where to invest your energy. Most people are not malicious. They are simply driven by needs they do not acknowledge. Some seek validation and will shift their behavior to gain approval. Some crave status and will subtly undermine others who threaten their position. Some fear abandonment and will cling tightly to anyone who gives them a sense of importance. Some feel insufficient and will disguise their insecurity with arrogance or criticism. When you understand these internal drives, you stop taking behavior personally. You stop reacting impulsively. You stop feeling wounded by disappointments that were predictable from the beginning. Awareness creates distance, not emotional distance, but mental space. Space that allows you to respond intentionally rather than react emotionally. Space that keeps you steady when someone tries to provoke you. Space that allows you to decide who deserves your generosity and who only drains it. Space that reveals the difference between partnerships and liabilities. And this space gives you control, not over others, but over yourself. That control is what changes your presence. When you understand the moves people make when they think you're not watching, you stop letting circumstances pull you in every direction. You stop chasing validation. You stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. You stop participating in petty conflicts or emotional traps. You become calm, not because life becomes easier, but because your perception becomes sharper. People will feel this shift in you long before you explain it. They will sense a quiet self-possession, a steadiness that cannot be manipulated, a calm that unnerves those who rely on emotional reactions to gain influence. Some will respect you more. Some will envy you. Some will test you. Some will retreat. And all of it will reveal what you need to see. There is a moment. You will recognize it when it arrives. When the hidden language of behavior becomes clear. When the world stops feeling random. When people's motives become readable. And when your past confusion begins to make sense. You start realizing how many conflicts could have been avoided if you had paid attention earlier. How many disappointments were signals you ignored. How many situations were predictable patterns rather than surprises? This realization is not regret. It is refinement. It is the sharpening of your lens. It is the quiet shift from being shaped by your environment to shaping your response to it. And this shift is the foundation of power, not the loud, visible kind, but the inward kind that cannot be taken from you. When you see the moves people make when they think you're not watching, you stop living reactively. You start living intentionally. Chapter 6, the unspoken rules that decide who moves ahead. There is a quiet system beneath every environment you enter. A system of unspoken rules, invisible hierarchies, and subtle expectations that determine who rises, who stagnates, and who gets quietly pushed aside. These rules are almost never explained. They aren't written down, they aren't taught directly, and they aren't announced when you enter a new chapter of your life. Most people learn them the hard way. Some never learn them at all. If your father didn't teach you how to read these rules, you may have moved through life believing that fairness, honesty, and talent were the primary forces that shaped outcomes. But as Machievelli understood, outcomes are shaped by perception, by timing, and by a person's ability to recognize hidden dynamics long before anyone else does. This chapter is an exploration of those dynamics. Not louder strategies, not manipulative tactics, but the quiet rules that operate beneath the surface. Because the moment you recognize these rules, everything around you becomes more predictable. Not easier, but more understandable. You stop feeling confused by why certain people succeed despite lesser skill. You stop being surprised when someone is promoted for their loyalty instead of their competence. You stop wondering why two people with the same effort end up with completely different results. The unspoken rules explain what logic never could. The first rule is simple. Every environment has its center of gravity, the individual or group whose opinions carry the most weight, whose reactions shape the behavior of others, and whose approval quietly determines what is acceptable. This center is not always the boss. Sometimes it's the most charismatic person in the room. Sometimes it's the one who sets the tone socially. Sometimes it's the one others fear disappointing. Most people ignore this center and try to navigate the world using formal titles or official structures. But influence rarely follows job descriptions. Influence follows emotional currents, and the person who reads these currents accurately gains an advantage others mistake for intuition. The second rule: opportunities come to those who create certainty in uncertain environments. When people feel unsure about decisions, about risks, about outcomes, they gravitate toward whoever offers stability. It doesn't matter if that stability comes through competence, through calmness, or simply through consistency. People follow those who make their world feel less chaotic. If your presence eases tension instead of adding to it, if your energy steadies rather than destabilizes, you become someone others rely on even without realizing it. Machiavelli emphasized that rulers must appear unwavering even when uncertain, not because deception is noble, but because people collapse when their leaders collapse. And the same principle applies to you. Your steadiness becomes your leverage. The third rule: those who observe more than they speak rise faster than those who try to prove themselves through noise. The person who talks constantly reveals their insecurities, their motives, and their limits without realizing it. They play their entire hand in public. The quiet observer does the opposite. They collect information before committing. They learn the patterns before acting. They resist the urge to announce every opinion. Because of this, they strike with precision instead of chaos. They understand the landscape not from assumptions, but from patience. And in a world full of people who are desperate to be heard, the one who speaks intentionally becomes the most respected voice when they finally choose to speak. The fourth rule: loyalty is a currency, but it's not free, and it's rarely unconditional. Many people misunderstand loyalty. They treat it as a moral obligation, something they owe blindly. But loyalty without discernment is not virtue, it's vulnerability. Loyalty becomes valuable only when it is paired with observation, boundaries, and self-respect. When you give loyalty to someone who has not proven their consistency, you place yourself in the hands of instability. When you give loyalty to someone who has shown their integrity through repeated action, you build alliances that protect you in ways you could never protect yourself alone. The wise do not give loyalty immediately. They give attention first, assessment second, trust third, and loyalty only after the others have been earned. The fifth rule: people reward the version of you that aligns with their interests, not the version that aligns with your potential. This is one of the most difficult truths to accept. You may believe that others will support your growth because they like you, because they see your capabilities, because they want the best for you. But human nature is rarely that pure. People support what benefits them. They resist what threatens them. They ignore what confuses them. They elevate what compliments them. Machiavelli observed that men will abandon their friends the moment their own interests demand it. Not because they lack morals, but because self-preservation is instinctive. This understanding doesn't make you bitter. It makes you strategic. You stop expecting others to build your future. You take responsibility for building it yourself. The sixth rule: consistency outranks brilliance. The world is full of people with flashes of talent, moments of brilliance, or brief surges of effort. But success, real, stable, lasting success, rarely belongs to these people. It belongs to the ones who show up relentlessly, who improve quietly, who evolve steadily, who build when no one is watching. In every hierarchy, the person who is reliable becomes indispensable. The person who shows up the same way on good days and bad days becomes the backbone of the environment. And the person who is indispensable becomes powerful not because they demand authority, but because removing them would collapse something others depend on. The seventh rule: the calmest person in the room usually has the greatest advantage. Calmness is not passive. It is not softness. It is control. It is the refusal to be dragged into emotional currents that distort judgment. It is the understanding that reaction gives others power, while restraint keeps your power intact. Calmness creates an atmosphere around you, a presence that signals stability. And in a world filled with impulsive decisions, emotional outbursts, and reactive behavior, calmness becomes rare. Rare things become valuable, and valuable things become powerful. The eighth rule: understanding motives matters more than understanding words. People may lie. They may mask their intentions. They may flatter, manipulate, exaggerate, or minimize. But motives always leave fingerprints. A person seeking validation behaves one way. A person seeking control behaves another. A person seeking belonging behaves differently. When you understand what drives someone, you understand their future behavior long before it happens. This removes confusion from your relationships. It removes disappointment from your expectations. And it removes vulnerability from your decisions. The ninth rule: your silence shapes your image more powerfully than your words ever could. People study your stillness far more than your speech. They interpret your pauses. They analyze your reactions. They form judgments from what you don't explain, don't reveal, don't defend. Silence creates mystery, and mystery shifts the balance toward you. Machiavelli wrote that princes must learn when to withhold information, because predictability makes you controllable. Silence is not emptiness, it is strategy. And the 10th rule: you rise when your presence becomes an asset rather than a complication. When you bring clarity instead of confusion. When you bring strength instead of instability. When you bring direction instead of noise. When people feel more focused, more empowered, more steady when you are near them, you naturally rise in every environment because humans move toward what makes their world easier. These unspoken rules are not tricks. They are not shortcuts. They are the architecture of human behavior, the quiet structure beneath every social landscape. And the moment you learn to see them, you stop feeling behind. You stop feeling lost. You stop feeling misled. You start moving with intention instead of chance. Chapter 7: how power really shifts long before anyone notices. There are moments in life when power changes hands without a single word being spoken. No announcement, no confrontation, no public declaration, just a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a change in the way people look at someone, a quiet redirection of attention that only the observant can detect. Most people think power moves loudly. They expect drama, conflict, decisive moments. But Machiavelli understood that true power rarely arrives with spectacle. It emerges quietly, like a tide rising beneath your feet. And if your father never taught you to recognize that tide, you may have spent years misreading the signals that determined your place in every environment. This chapter explores that shift, the silent transfer of influence, respect, and authority that happens long before the world acknowledges it. Because when you learn to recognize these transitions early, you stop being surprised by outcomes. You stop being blindsided by changes. You start moving with foresight rather than reaction. The first sign of a power shift is subtle. People begin to adjust their tone when speaking to someone, even if they don't consciously notice it. They become slightly more careful, slightly more respectful, slightly more attentive. It's not obedience, it's acknowledgement. A recognition that the person's presence carries weight. And the fascinating thing is that this shift usually happens before the person themselves realizes they have become influential. Influence is not declared, it is recognized. The moment others instinctively adjust themselves, an invisible balance has already shifted. The second sign appears moments of uncertainty. When a group faces a problem, a hesitation, or a decision, there is always someone whose eyes they turn to first. Not the person with the official title, not the loudest voice, not the most confident talker, but the one whose judgment they trust. That instinctive glance, quick, almost unnoticeable, is a form of silent power. People look toward stability, they look toward clarity, and they look toward the person who seems grounded when others feel scattered. Power gravitates to composure. The third sign is even quieter. People begin to mimic the behaviors of the one gaining influence. Their phrasing, their attitude, their standards, their way of responding. Humans imitate what they admire or fear. When someone begins unconsciously setting the rhythm of the environment, even without effort, it is a signal that their presence shapes the group more than any authority ever could. Machiavelli noted that people follow examples more readily than commands. The one who sets the example becomes the one who shapes the room. A fourth indicator is how people react when the person is absent. Most people don't think to study this, but it reveals everything. If a room becomes disorganized when someone leaves, that person was a stabilizing force. If conversations shift direction once they are gone, their presence had gravity. If people speak more cautiously about them than they do about others, even without hostility, that person holds a form of power that does not rely on enforcement. It relies on respect. Absence often reveals power more clearly than presence. Another sign is how conflict forms around someone. When a person becomes influential, they draw both admiration and quiet resistance. Not open conflict, subtle friction. Those who feel threatened begin to position themselves defensively. They speak with unnecessary emphasis. They correct minor details to regain a sense of superiority. They withdraw slightly. These are not attacks. They are the ripples formed when someone senses a growing presence they can no longer ignore. People rarely resist those below them. Resistance is a reaction to rising energy. A sixth signal appears in the way opportunities begin to flow. Invitations. Information. Access. People naturally offer these to those they believe hold potential, because investing early is a strategic instinct. When someone receives support without asking, when their name is mentioned in positive contexts, when others begin aligning themselves with them, the shift is already underway. Power does not wait for titles. It grows through recognition. A seventh sign is in the person themselves. They begin choosing their reactions instead of falling into them. Their movements slow, their thoughts sharpen, their emotions settle. They no longer scramble for approval or validation. They begin responding with intention rather than impulse. This calmness is not born from arrogance. It is born from clarity. They see the environment more clearly, so they need fewer words, fewer explanations, fewer emotional reactions. Machiavelli believed that self-control is one of the strongest signals of leadership because it demonstrates mastery over the only battlefield that truly matters, the internal one. The eighth sign is how people speak about them when they are not present. Pay attention to the tone, not the content. If people describe them with phrases like, "He knows what he's doing," "He doesn't get involved in drama," "He keeps his word," or "He's different from the others," these are indicators that someone's reputation is quietly strengthening. Influence is not created by claims. It is created by consistency, and consistency builds a name that moves ahead of you. A ninth indicator is how quickly tensions resolve around them. When someone with growing influence enters a room, arguments soften, voices lower, people become more measured. It is an instinctive reaction to stability. Humans crave equilibrium. The presence of someone steady creates it, even without effort. And this steadiness becomes the anchor around which dynamics shift. The 10th sign, the clearest one, is when the person no longer needs to defend themselves, when they can walk away from misunderstandings without correcting them, when they do not chase explanations, when they no longer feel the impulse to prove their worth. This freedom signals a turning point. When someone stops seeking validation, their value increases naturally. Others sense that independence and respond to it, consciously or not. People respect the one who does not beg for respect. Power, in its real form, is never loud. It is never forced. It does not rely on intimidation, domination, or noise. Real power is recognized, not declared. And once these quiet signs begin to appear, subtle shifts in tone, attention, imitation, opportunity, and atmosphere, the change has already happened long before the world acknowledges it. And when you learn to see these signs early, you stop being a spectator of power. You begin to understand its architecture. You begin moving in ways that position you naturally. You stop chasing influence and instead develop the qualities that make influence inevitable. When power begins shifting in your direction, you don't need to announce it. You simply need to remain steady enough to carry it. Chapter 8. The quiet shift inside him. The moon rose like a slow breath over the distant rooftops, its soft glow drifting across the narrow street where Ethan walked alone. The evening air carried a lingering warmth, the kind that held the last traces of daylight and mixed them gently with the first cool touches of night. He moved without urgency, letting his steps fall into the natural rhythm of a mind trying to understand itself. The city around him had begun settling into its nightly ritual, windows lighting up one by one, motorbikes thinning out, the usual noise falling into a softer hum. Yet despite the calm, something in him felt unsettled, as if he was walking with a conversation that refused to quiet down. There had been a shift inside him earlier that day. Not dramatic, not loud. More like the slow turning of a wheel he didn't realize had been stuck for years. It happened in a way he didn't expect, through a simple moment of stillness. He remembered standing by the window that morning, watching sunlight touch the sides of distant buildings. For once, he wasn't rushing anywhere. He wasn't preparing himself for another day of tasks or pushing himself through another list of expectations. He just stood there, letting himself exist without a purpose attached to every second. And in that quiet, he noticed how exhausted he truly was. Not from effort, but from constantly trying to be someone more impressive, more certain, more in control. The thought followed him now as he walked beneath the dim street lamps. He had always believed change required something enormous, some grand event that would force him to transform. But what he felt today didn't resemble transformation at all. It was softer, more human, like he was slowly allowing himself to breathe in a way he never permitted before. And perhaps that was why it stayed with him long after the moment had passed. He paused by a small convenience store, its neon sign flickering softly. The owner, an older man with gentle eyes and a quiet demeanor, nodded at him through the window. Ethan returned the gesture, noticing how the simple exchange felt grounding. There was comfort in these tiny, unspoken connections, the ones that didn't demand anything except presence. Some part of him realized he had been avoiding such moments for years, afraid they held no measurable value. But tonight, they eased something inside him in ways he couldn't quite define. As he continued walking, he noticed how the street seemed different even though nothing had changed. The shadows appeared softer, the distant sounds gentler, the night sky a little clearer. It wasn't the world. It was him. His mind wasn't rushing ahead or falling behind. It was, strangely, right here. And with that presence came an awareness he hadn't felt in a long time. He could sense the weight he had been carrying. It sat somewhere beneath his ribs, almost familiar, shaped by years of doubt, pressure, and self-comparison. He had accepted it as a part of him without ever questioning whether he could set it down. He remembered something someone once told him, that people often cling to what hurts because it's the only thing they've known long enough to confuse it with stability. At the time, he didn't understand how anyone could hold on to pain willingly. But now he saw it in himself. His old habits, his constant striving, his fear of slowing down. None of them helped him, yet he held them tightly, as if losing them would make him lose himself. Tonight, for the first time, he wondered what it would feel like to loosen his grip. He turned into a quieter alley lined with small trees, their leaves rustling lightly as a breeze passed through. The sound felt like a whisper in a silent room, subtle yet strangely comforting. He slowed his pace, letting the breeze brush against him. And in that moment, he realized something he had never allowed himself to think. He didn't need to know where he was going to keep moving. He didn't need every answer, every plan, every detail neatly arranged. Maybe progress wasn't about control, but about trust. Trusting his pace, his instincts, the quiet shifts happening inside him, even when he didn't fully understand them. He reached a small stone bench and sat down, letting his body settle into the cool surface. The night around him was still, not empty, but peaceful in a way that invited reflection. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, listening to the faint sounds of the city, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional laughter from a group passing far away, the quiet rustle of leaves. It all blended into something soft and grounding. He felt himself sinking with it, letting the world breathe around him without feeling the need to rush or resist. He opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. The moon had climbed higher, resting like a silver lantern above the dark rooftops. Clouds drifted past it slowly, as if time itself had loosened its tight grip. And as he watched, he felt something settle inside him, a sense of quiet acceptance, not of defeat, but of understanding. He didn't have to fix everything tonight. He didn't have to redefine his whole life in one chapter. All he needed was to acknowledge that change was already happening, quietly and steadily, beneath the surface. And maybe that was enough for now. He let out a slow breath, feeling its warmth fade into the cool night air. The heaviness in his chest hadn't disappeared, but it felt different, like it was no longer something he had to fight alone. He stood up from the bench, feeling a softness in his steps he hadn't noticed before. The street stretched ahead of him, calm and open, not demanding anything from him except that he keep moving at his own pace. As he walked forward, he carried with him the quiet shift he felt earlier, a small but steady reminder that even the calmest changes have the power to reshape the way he sees his own life. And though he didn't know where this newfound awareness would lead, he felt ready to let it guide him into whatever came next, one unhurried step at a time. Chapter 9, where his memories began to speak softly. The night had deepened by the time Ethan reached the old bridge at the edge of the district. It wasn't a remarkable place. No stunning view, no famous story behind it. But something about its quiet simplicity always drew him in when his mind felt heavy. The water beneath flowed slowly, carrying reflections of streetlights that stretched into long, trembling lines. He rested his hands on the railing, feeling the slight chill of the metal, and allowed the moment to settle around him like a gentle embrace. This bridge held something familiar, something that nudged at pieces of his past he rarely let surface. Tonight, those memories rose with more clarity than usual. Not the dramatic ones, not the defining milestones people shared in conversations, but the smaller fragments, the ones shaped by ordinary days that somehow left the deepest marks. He remembered a morning when he was barely 12, sitting beside his father on this same bridge. The two of them had come here after an argument Ethan had with his older cousin. He couldn't recall the details anymore, only the stubborn anger he carried, a feeling too big for someone his age. His father hadn't lectured him that day. Instead, he simply sat beside him, legs dangling off the edge, allowing silence to lead the conversation. At the time, Ethan didn't appreciate the gesture. He wanted answers, solutions, something to explain why he felt misunderstood. But now, looking back, he realized that the quiet companionship was the closest thing to comfort he could have received. It struck him how similar he was to that younger version of himself, carrying emotions that sometimes felt too large, waiting for someone to explain what he should do with them. Yet life had a way of teaching him through moments like these, moments that didn't come with clear instructions, but still left their imprint. He looked down at the water again, watching as faint ripples disturbed the shimmering light. Each ripple spread, creating rings that overlapped and drifted outward until they blended back into the slow current. And suddenly, he found himself thinking about how memories worked, how the smallest ones, something as simple as sitting silently beside someone you trusted, could send ripples into later years without you realizing it, how they could shape the way you handled loneliness, comfort, or quiet conversations with yourself. He wondered how many of his current habits came from those unspoken lessons. His tendency to withdraw when overwhelmed, his instinct to search for quiet spaces instead of sharing his burden, his strange comfort in stillness even when he didn't understand what it meant. It all felt connected somehow, not in a painful way, but in a way that made him understand himself with a little more gentleness. A light breeze moved across the bridge, brushing through his hair. It carried the faint scent of the river mixed with subtle traces of night-blooming flowers from a nearby garden. The scent tugged at another memory, one of late evenings spent at his grandmother's home. He remembered her small garden behind the house, filled with hardy flowers that somehow survived every season. She often took care of them after sunset, saying the night made the plants breathe easier. Ethan used to watch her from the doorway, fascinated by how calm she looked while tending to each stem. She never rushed. Every movement held intention, patience, and a quiet kind of love. It occurred to him now how often he tried to rush through his own growth, expecting clarity to bloom overnight. But maybe he was more like those flowers, slow to open, needing the right kind of quiet to breathe. The thought softened something inside him. Moments like these, spread across years, seemed to gather around him on this bridge, creating a tapestry of memories that whispered the truths he had overlooked. They didn't push him forward or hold him back. They simply reminded him of who he had always been beneath the layers of expectations and self-doubt. A pair of motorbikes crossed the bridge behind him, their engines echoing briefly before fading into the distance. The sound brought him back into the present, where the night remained calm and unhurried. He lowered his gaze, noticing how his reflection seemed faint in the dark water, blurred, distorted, shifting with every ripple. Yet instead of feeling disconnected from it, he felt strangely aligned. It mirrored how he often felt about himself, not fully defined, constantly changing, but still there, still moving, still finding shape in ways he didn't always understand. He leaned back from the railing, letting his eyes drift across the quiet street beyond the bridge. Lamps stood in a gentle row, their soft light stretching across the pavement. A stray cat wandered near the base of one pole, pausing as if deciding whether to approach him or continue on its solitary path. The cat eventually moved along, disappearing into the shadows with a grace that made its presence feel almost symbolic. It reminded him of how people, and even parts of himself, came and went in quiet ways, leaving behind traces he didn't always notice until much later. He took in a deeper breath, feeling the coolness fill his lungs. Something about this night offered him a space he rarely gave himself, the space to remember without judgment, to acknowledge the younger version of himself who struggled with emotions he couldn't name, to honor the lessons hidden in ordinary moments, to understand that his life had never been defined by the dramatic turning points he often chased, but by the soft, quiet shifts he barely recognized at the time. He pushed gently away from the railing, feeling the weight of these reflections settle in a steady, grounded way. He didn't feel overwhelmed or nostalgic in the way he expected. Instead, he felt connected to his past, to the present, to the subtle threads that tied both together. The night remained open ahead of him, and as he began walking off the bridge, he carried with him a clearer sense of why these memories resurfaced now. They weren't meant to pull him backward. They were here to remind him that the gentlest moments often carried the truths he needed most, that understanding himself didn't require force, only attention, and that sometimes the person he had been long ago still had something to tell him if he was willing to listen quietly. And tonight, for the first time in a long while, he was. Chapter 10. The evening when the world finally felt honest. The sky was slipping into its final shade of blue when Ethan stepped out onto the narrow street leading back toward the heart of the city. The distant glow of buildings rose like a quiet constellation, and for a moment he simply stood there, letting the scene unfold in front of him. The world felt strangely unguarded tonight, as if the city had loosened its grip and revealed a softer truth beneath the noise. He could feel it in the stillness of the air, in the slow pulse of lights along the roadside, in the way the silence didn't demand anything from him. It was the kind of evening that nudged him toward a deeper awareness, the kind that allowed thoughts to settle instead of scatter. He walked slowly at first, without rushing. His footsteps echoed softly against the pavement, blending into the quiet rhythm of distant traffic. There was no particular destination in mind, just movement, a gentle drift through the night, as if his body understood something he hadn't put into words yet. The reflections from storefront windows accompanied him like silent companions, layering the street with faint glimmers of gold and white. And in that reflective glow, he found himself noticing how calm he felt. Not empty, not numb, simply calm, as though a long internal storm had finally tired itself out. As he continued walking, he passed a row of small restaurants lining the sidewalk. Most had already closed, leaving behind dimly lit interiors with stacked chairs and the lingering scent of meals served hours earlier. One restaurant remained open, a modest noodle shop with soft, warm lighting and fogged-up windows. He paused outside for a moment, watching an elderly man inside wiping a table with slow, deliberate movements. The man didn't seem rushed or tired. He looked content in the silent routine of closing for the night. There was a simplicity in the scene that struck Ethan deeply. He realized he admired people who carried peace in their movements, people who didn't need noise or recognition to feel whole. Instead of going inside, he kept walking, drawn further into the quiet streets. His thoughts drifted back to the bridge, to the memories that had surfaced so gently. Those memories had not overwhelmed him. They had grounded him. They had shown him that his past wasn't a story of dramatic highs or crushing lows, but a collection of small, patient teachings scattered throughout ordinary moments. The realization felt like a soft weight on his chest, not heavy but steady, reminding him that he had never truly been as lost as he once believed. A few minutes later, he reached a small park resting between two apartment buildings. It wasn't the kind of park people visited for leisure or celebration. It was more of a passing-through space, a patch of greenery with a couple of benches, a dim lamp, and a narrow path that cut through to the next street. He stepped onto the path, drawn toward the quiet glow of the lamp. Beneath it stood a single bench, empty and waiting. He sat down, letting the night settle around him once again. The breeze here was cooler, carrying the subtle fragrance of damp earth and distant rain. He leaned back, letting the bench support his weight as he looked at the patch of sky visible between the rooftops. A few stars peeked through, faint but steady. Their presence reminded him of something he hadn't thought about in years. How, as a child, he used to lie on the roof of his parents' house, staring up at the sky with an unshakable belief that life held some kind of quiet magic. Not dramatic magic, not miracles or fantasies, but the kind wrapped in stillness, in moments when the world made sense without explanation. He wondered when he lost that sense of quiet wonder. Maybe it faded somewhere between responsibilities and expectations. Maybe it dimmed when he began measuring himself against others, chasing validation he never truly needed. Or maybe it never disappeared entirely. Maybe it had simply waited for him to slow down long enough to notice it again. A soft rustling caught his attention. He turned and noticed a middle-aged woman walking her dog along the path. She moved with the gentle pace of someone who wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere. When she passed him, she offered a small nod, and he returned it with the same quiet acknowledgement. It was a simple exchange, but it felt meaningful. A reminder that connection didn't always require conversation. Sometimes presence was enough. As she disappeared onto the next street, he felt a subtle clarity rising within him. Not a realization shaped by logic or sudden insight, but a gradual settling, as if his thoughts had finally arranged themselves into a form he could understand. He wasn't searching for answers tonight. He wasn't trying to repair anything or plan his next step. He was simply listening, allowing the world to speak in the soft language it used when he wasn't distracted by the noise of his own worries. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. In that brief stillness, he sensed his younger self again, not as a ghost of who he was, but as a reminder of who he had always been beneath everything he learned to hide. That younger version of him wasn't asking for guidance anymore. He was offering it. He was showing Ethan that all of his quiet instincts, the ones he often ignored, were rooted in something true. When he opened his eyes, he felt lighter. Not because his life had suddenly changed, but because he finally understood something important. The world didn't need to be dramatic to be meaningful. Growth didn't require noise, strength didn't require hardness, and understanding didn't require a grand revelation. Sometimes it simply required listening to the smaller moments, the ones that spoke gently, patiently, and honestly. He rose from the bench and started walking again, moving with a steadier rhythm than before. The night didn't feel vast or lonely anymore. It felt familiar, almost welcoming. Each step carried a quiet assurance, as though he had finally aligned himself with something he had long been out of sync with. As he left the park and stepped back onto the street, the city lights greeted him with a soft glow. He didn't feel behind. He didn't feel uncertain. For the first time in a long while, he felt present, fully, calmly, unmistakably present. And in that presence, the world felt honest. The kind of honest that doesn't shout or demand, but simply exists, steady, patient, and waiting for those who finally slow down enough to see it.